Today is Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and we know that Rosh Chodesh Iyar in itself is a tremendous time, as all Roshei Chodeshim are. But particular Iyar in itself is a very, very misugal month. It's has the tremendous opportunity to bring healing. In that Iyar, the name Iyar, as explained by some of our sages, is an acronym for Aleph Yud Yud Reish, Ani, Aleph, I, Hashem, Yud Yud is Hashem, Reish is Refoecha. I, Hashem, am your healer. Now we know that when a doctor heals, even the best of doctors can leave scars. But when Hashem heals, He removes and uproots the ailment to the extent that there was never any sickness to begin with. Also, as the Rebbe explains, Iyar, there's a question if Iyar is written with one Yud or double Yud. And we know that we read it with a double Yud because we write it with a double Yud because it stands for Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel. Avraham is Aleph, Yud Yitzchak, the second Yud is Yaakov, and the Reish is Rachel. Now the Rebbe asks a question. Why exactly do we pair up Rachel as the Reish with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? If we're going to pair one of the mothers, should it be Rivka? Why Rachel? Especially that Rachel only gave birth to two of the tribes, Yosef and Binyamin. Two of the sons, Yosef divided into two tribes, Menashe and Ephraim and Menashe. But nevertheless, she was the mother of only two of the sons. We find a very interesting phenomenon with Rachel that we don't find with the rest of the mothers, not with Sarah, not with Rivka. And not even with Leah. In that we find that Rachel is the only mother of the only one of the four mothers who is not buried in Marat Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. That when Sarah passed away, we discussed this. Avraham approached the Chitim and bought a plot of land, Hebron, with that cave in order to bury Sarah in there. We know that Adam and Chava are buried there. Avram and Sarah are buried there. Yitzchak and Rivka are buried there. Yaakov and Leah are buried there. Even as we discussed about 8 months ago, even Esav's head is buried there. Rachel is the only one that's not buried there. We do find two reasons for why she is not there. And they're seemingly, the Rebbe says, they're contradicting each other. Number one, because she gave up an opportunity to be intimate with Yaakov, exchanging it for the Dudaim. That she saw that Reuven was gathering Dudaim, things like it's jasmine, or it's a type of a plant that increases fertility. And it was her night to be with Yaakov, as Yaakov would spend time in Rachel's tent, and in Leah's tent, and in the other maidservant's tent. It was her night to be with Yaakov, but when she saw that there was dudaim, the Reuven was gathering dudaim, these plants. She asked him if she could take some, if he would be willing to exchange, and he says, "Sure, let my mother. You can give my mother your night." Or she offered this, "I'll give my night up to be with Yaakov, and I'll take the dudaim so I can get pregnant." So the sages says because she disgraced being with the tzaddik, as a result of this, she lost her spot in the Marat Machpelah. On the other hand, we find a completely diametrical opposite explanation, which is that she will eventually be of help to her children, to the entire Jewish people. That when the Jewish people were being exiled into Babylonia after the destruction of the first temple, they were taken out of Israel through Bethlehem, where she is buried. And Rachel comes out of her grave, as it were, and as her children are walking by the plot, by the oil of Rachel, which is still there today, she would cry and beseech Hashem, "Please bring my children back to their land." And Hashem responds back. And this is recorded in Yirmiyahu, the book of Jeremiah, this entire conversation in chapter 31. Anyway, so Hashem responds back. "Cease your tears, abstain from crying. For there is great merit and there is great reward for your activity. I will revert back the children back to their borders." Hashem promises Rachel that because of her pleas and because of her activities, Hashem will revert back the Jewish people, back to Eretz Yisrael eventually. Now, how do we reconcile these 2 points? That on one hand, Rachel is not buried in the Marat Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, because, as our sages tell us, is she disgraced being with Yaakov. She gave her one opportunity up. On the other hand, it's the opposite. She is placed on the edge of Israel. So when the Jewish people were sent out of exile, she'll plead with Hashem, and Hashem will promise her, based on her giving up, based on her conceding, that the Jewish people will eventually revert back to the land. In other words, it was very important for her to be there and not in Machpelah. How do we reconcile these two? Our sages tell us something very interesting. It says that the forefathers and the mothers came in front of Hashem in order to beseech mercy upon the Jewish people. But Hashem was not taking any pleas from them until Rachel came in front of Hashem and says to Hashem, "Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, whose mercy is greater? Your mercy or the mercy of flesh and blood of mankind? I would say that your mercy is greater, Hashem. They're much more ample. And if that's true, if your mercy is greater, then let's compare your mercy, or mercy of a flesh and blood of a human being. Let's take me, for example," Rachel says. I allowed and conceded my sister to marry my husband. In other words, I originally made up with Yaakov, and Yaakov worked on my behalf for 7 years so he could marry me. And yet, in order to spare my sister's embarrassment when my father was acting treacherously and switched us, I could have downright told Yaakov the plan. I could have told him what was happening, but instead, not only I didn't tell him, I gave my sister the very signs that we've agreed between me and Yaakov, because we knew my father would attempt to do something. So we gave each other signs, so we'll be able to convey whether or not I'm the actual bride or not. And I gave those signs to my sister so she won't be embarrassed in front of everyone. So not only I was silent, I gave up those signs. So just like I gave up Hashem, and I gave up being his only wife, just like I gave this up, you also remain silent, Hashem. In other words, don't judge them. Just like I gave up what I felt was 100% right, and nevertheless I did it in order to spare my sister's shame, so to Hashem, you remain silent with judging them. But you bring your children back. Yes, it's going to hurt. Just like it hurt to me to bring my sister Leah into my home, into my family unit, so to Hashem, you bring the Jewish. Yeah, it's going to be hard for you. It's going to be painful for you to bring him at this point, because maybe they didn't earn it. Maybe they don't merit it. But nevertheless, I give it up, Hashem. You give up your comfort as well, and you bring them back. If I'm a human being of flesh and blood, and I was able to do this, and I wasn't jealous for my sister, and I allowed this in order to propagate the Jewish people, you are a living and eternal king. Why were you jealous over Avodah Zarah, over idol worship, that they're worshiping idols? It's not even real. Why are you getting upset with them over something that's not even real? I allow my sister to come into my family, and I was silent with it, and I allowed it. My jealousy is not any less than yours, or is your jealousy not less than mine? Because in reality, we can't say that Hashem gets jealous. Because Hashem is the ultimate and truthful reality. His reality is essentially truth. When it comes to a created reality, it's very different. Our reality is compounded. There's us, and there's what we see, what we interact with. In other words, there's outside of us. So there's room for jealousy for these kind of things. But in reality, by Hashem, there's nothing outside of him, God forbid, that he should be jealous. So Rachel is telling him, you are essentially beyond all of this. As soon as Rachel said this to Hashem, Hashem's mercy took over completely. And Hashem says, Bishvilach Rachel, for you, Rachel, I will bring the Jewish people back to their place. Hashem says, prevent your voice from crying and your eyes from tearing, because there's reward for your activity. There's hope for your descendants. Hashem testifies, your children will come back to their borders. And you've defended accurately. Because what the reward for what activity? for your righteousness that you gave your signs up to your sister. Seemingly, we have to understand this. In giving the signs to her sister, which is, as we said before, implies that she wasn't intimate with her husband, with Yaakov, that night. I'm sorry, that particular night, the wedding night, she was intimate with her sister, which is seemingly a chisaron. It's a deficit.
Wedding she was intimate with.
She wasn't married. She gave up those signs to her sister, to Leah, when she was supposed to get married. They set up the night, and it was everything, but they were twins, Rachel and Leah. And Leah was just older by Rachel by not too much, but they were twins, identical twins. Just like Yaakov and Esav were identical twins. Well, Esav had gingy hair. But nevertheless, they were twins. And it was supposed to be, the oldest was supposed to marry the oldest, and the youngest, the youngest. Rachel was supposed to marry Yaakov. But Rachel realized that her father Lavan switched with Leah, putting Leah instead of Rachel to get married to Yaakov, for whatever reasoning he had. Leah and Yaakov gave each other signs because they realized that Lavan was going to try some treachery in last minute. So they gave signs so she'll be able to identify to him that I'm actually Rachel. But when they realized what was happening, Rachel actually gave those signs to Yaakov, to Leah, to her sister. And Leah used those signs with Yaakov to identify herself as Rachel. Nevertheless, she gave up their signs. She gave up the opportunity to be intimate that night with him, which seemingly is a deficit of sorts. And not only that, we see that later on she gave up her night again with Yaakov in order to acquire dudayim, these plants that would make her fertile so she could get pregnant. So how is this considered to be a positive, a virtuous activity to the extent that it swayed Hashem's decision, as it were, as regarding the exile of the Jewish people? That because of this, the Jewish people will be reverted back to their source, to their borders, to Israel. But the explanation is the given. That being intimate with the tzaddik, with Yaakov, is one of the greatest spiritual virtues, that to give it up is something humongous. And nevertheless, Rachel agreed to give this up and gave those signs to her sister. In other words, what did she give up? She gave up her ruchniut. She gave up her spirituality. Because this wasn't just a physical, obviously, it wasn't a physical intimacy that she was giving up the spiritual opportunity to be with him. She didn't just give up the gashmias, she gave up the ruchnius. Not only the physical, she gave up the spiritual. And all this for one reason. So she could be of aid to her children later on. So she could plead mercy on their behalf when Hashem was casting them out of their land. This is the greatest virtue of a mother. That she is willing to give up her entire, not just her physical, but her spiritual, for the sake of her descendants. And for this, Hashem promises her, Bishvilach Rachel, for you, Rachel, Ani machzir es Yisrael mekomam, for you, Rachel, I'll revert back the Jewish people back to their land. And he says, "V'shavu banim legvulam," and the children will go back to their borders. Now we could understand why ER is Aleph Yud Yud Reish Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Rachel. What's the connection between Rachel and the forefathers? Just like the forefathers pertain to every Jewish person. Now we know there are the three forefathers, F-O-R-E, the original founding fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. The tribes, they're not considered the founding fathers of Judaism. Because Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov pertain to every Jew throughout history at all times. But not everyone pertains to Yehud, to Levi, for example, or to Asher or to Dan, because each one represents a different force. But so does Rachel pertain to the entire Jewish people, just like Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Not only to two of the sons, Yosef and Binyamin, rather to the entire Jewish people. Because Rachel gave up her soul, she has Mesiras Nefesh, in order that she'll be able to plead on behalf of the Jewish people throughout history to revert back the Jewish people back to Israel. And in her merit, Hashem promises that the children will go back to their borders, which pertains to the entire Jewish people. And we could add that in addition to her doing her best, to her exerting herself for the sake of the improvement of the Jewish people, that she cries and begs and pleads mercy upon for them, she also does the same for the Shekhinah, for the feminine godly presence. Because what is the verse say in Yirmiyahu? Rachel mevaka banea ki eineno. That Rachel cries over her children because he is not there. Now the Rebbe says, wait a second, in Torah, that the Shura says, the Bnei Yisrael are not there. She's crying that Bnei Yisrael are not in their land anymore. That's why they're not there. But the verse says because he is not there. Ki eineino. Seemingly it should have says ki einam, for they're not there. But Rachel says eineno, he is not. What's not there? That the godly presence, the Shekhinah, has been removed. And that's what causes the exile.
It's been removed
from the world. That's what exile is. What's the difference between Gola and Geula? Exile, Gola, and Geula, which is redemption. There's only one difference in the spelling. In Gola, the word exile is written exactly the same way as Geula. Same letters, except Geula has one extra letter, Aleph. In the Geula, the Aleph is right in the middle. What is this Aleph? Aleph is Alufo Shel Olam, the master of the world. Hashem. The difference between Gola and Geula is revealing that Hashem is openly revealed and manifest in everything. When Gola, it's everything is concealed. The Shekhinah is the feminine presence of Hashem. Shekhinah comes from Shochen, dwelling. That Unlike the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that when we call upon a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, the Holy One, blessed is He, why do we call Him the Holy One? Obviously He's holy. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the word, as we said many times, the word holy means removed, separate. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, when we said to Hashem, we were talking about God as removed from creation. He's above creation. Shekhinah, on the other hand, is the part of Hashem that is invested within creation. And it's felt, and it's open. So Rachel is crying because as it says, Ki einei no, for he is not there, because her husband, as the Zohar says, removed himself. What does it mean, a husband? Hashem is removed. He is not there. And as because of this, there's an exile.
Is it appropriate to think of exile as Hashem is here, but we need to reveal Him?
That's definitely part of it.
Because there's no place that He's not, right?
Right. The question is on what level, to what degree, which part, like what part, and so on and so forth. We're learning the Kabbalah of this on Shabbos afternoons. We've been learning this. Right? It says in exile, Hashem goes higher and higher and higher. He's completely retracted. And there's a lot to be said about it. But yes, this is the reason why the world is acting. We don't see anything. Everything's so obscure at this point. But nevertheless, Rachel doesn't just cry on behalf of the Jewish people. She cries on behalf of Hashem, being absent, as it were. She is crying over the lack of revelation of the Shekhinah into this world. And therefore, she's affecting not only that the Jewish people will revert back to their borders, but that Hashem will reveal Himself in the future redemption, which is imminent any minute now. So this month is a very, very, very powerful month, in that it brings healing. And it reminds us of the upcoming redemption. There is a Zgula, by the way. It says the rains of ER are therapeutic, are healing. There's a Zgula to walk in the rain and ER. There's a Zgula to drink from the rain of ER. But it's definitely pertinent to say the Sfirat HaOmer every single day. Like today is the 16th of this Sfirat HaOmer, which is 2 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. As we spoke about yesterday, the third week we focus on Tiferet, compassion. And Gvura Shebetiferet, which is discipline of compassion, means that compassion in itself has to also be disciplined in order for it to be a healthy and holy attribute. It needs to be focused, because it certainly requires discretion, both to who you're going to be compassionate towards, and in how you're going to mete out that measure of the compassion you're going to be meting out. We have to recognize when compassion has to be expressed and when we have to withhold it, or at least limit it a little bit. The discipline, the gvura of Tiferet, the discipline of compassion that we're working on throughout today, is knowing that by being truly compassionate, sometimes it actually does require us to withhold. Because ultimately, unlike Chesed and Gvura, as we spoke about before, which Chesed and Gvura are reactive towards the one who is doing the feeling, the emoting, Tiferet is a responsive attribute. It's based on the other's need. That's why compassion is not about me, but rather the outside. And so it's not based on what I'm feeling, and therefore, if it's based on the needs for the other's needs, then we need to make sure that we focus the compassion and we custom tailor, which is a gvura. Gvura is custom tailoring. It's focusing, it's disciplining it for the need of the other that we're being compassionate towards.
Is it also okay to consider self-compassion, or that's not included here?
Say it again?
When we think about compassion, do we also consider compassion towards inner compassion?
Of course. Dr. Rebbe says it in Tanya. We learned it several times, including, I believe, yesterday's Tanya, that we have to have compassion for the nefesh elokis, for our godly soul. That it's, think about how much we have, how much compassion Hashem has towards His son that was taken to a foreign land and basically being taken hostage by the Yetzer Hara, by the animals, or by Gullus. How much compassion do you have to have? How much compassion do you have for yourself? And on that, having compassion for yourself, Yaakov Asher Padas at Avraham says that Yaakov redeemed Avraham. What does that mean? The Alter Rebbe says that compassion could redeem kindness, love. And sometimes when a person doesn't have self-love, or even love towards this fellow, you could redeem it through compassion. So here's today's exercises that we really need to think about. And this is, it's because we want to make sure that our motive self, the way that we express ourselves is genuine, that it's luminescent, that, as we said before, our emotions are luminescent. That's Sfirat HaOmer. Counting the Omer, as we said before, Sfira comes from sapphire, the sapphire stone, to illuminate the Omer, the animalistic emotive traits. How? By reintroducing intellect into them. Or we can say even introducing intellect for the first time, drawing intellect into these emotions for the first time. So the first question a person could really live with throughout the day, the question a person should ask themselves is, and do I tend to be more compassionate with strangers than the close one, my spouse, my children, myself, God? Are we compassionate with God? Think about how God feels. It must be lonely on the top. Because when things don't go right, he's the biggest loser. He set up thousands of years of history for things to happen if we just, I'm not in the mood today. So think about who lost the most. We think we lost. But he set up thousands of years. He creates a world, something from nothing every single second. So something happens and some creation, it's okay. I'm not in the mood for Shabbos today. I'm not in the mood for kosher. I'm not in the mood to give today. I'm not in the mood to say I'm good today. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. That in itself is the biggest shame in the world. because then Hashem loses out the most. It's not us. So this is a question we have to ask throughout today. How is my compassion being delivered? How is my compassion being expressed? It's easy to be compassionate when it suits us. But again, we got to remember, who loses out when we're not? Who loses out when we take things for granted? When we take those around us for granted? You would think that that in itself damages a family unit, the community, and so on. Well, that it does. But on the spiritual scope of things, ultimately it's Hashem that loses out. Because these relationships are not just by the way relationships. Every one of these relationships are pertinent to fulfilling Hashem's ultimate desire in creating this universe. And every one of these interactions ultimately lend themselves to complete Hashem's desire in bringing Mashiach. As the Roman matron was once asked one of our Talmudic sages, what has your God been doing since creating the world? Okay, so he had 7 interesting days, very, very productive days, but since then what he's been doing? And he says he sits in Shamaim and he is making shidduchim. He's matching matches. So she says to him, well, I don't need to be God to do something like that. I could do it on my own. I have slaves. I have 5,000 slaves. 5,000. I have 10,000 slaves. I'll take 5,000 men and put it up with the women, and that's it. I don't have to be God. And she did that. But the next day, when she brought all of the new happily married couples that she just put together yesterday, they all came up with bumps and bruises and cuts because they all fought each other. And then she says, now I understand that your God is truly wise, and so on and so forth. But what is the meaning of this? What's the depth of this? That we know the shidduchim, matches between husband and wife, is not just on the local level. As we learned before, the husband and wife also are akin to the match between the soul and the body. The husband being the soul and the woman being the body. But aside from that, also between the person who is working and their mission in life. The person being the husband and the mission being, or the workspace is the wife. And this synergy is implicit in every single one of our marriages. Between the physical and the spiritual, between the divine and the mundane, the finite and the infinite, the husband and the wife, the body and the soul, the person and their mission, and so on and so forth. So when it says that Hashem is making shidduchim, it means that Hashem is literally crafting every single detail so everybody will have the exact soul that it needs. Every person will meet the exact person that they need to meet. Every person will come upon the work and the workspace that they need to come into in order to fulfill Hashem's desire in making this universe and bring Mashiach. So when a person is not compassionate towards those who Hashem is giving them, this is not just, by the way, creating family obstruction for shalom, for harmony in the family and the community. This is creating a global obstruction of magnificent proportions. Because as the Alter Rebbe explains, that just like as the Rambam brings and is brought down, that for a healthy body to be healthy, the blood has to be able to travel unimpeded. And God forbid all the ailments begin when there's impediments in the circulation of the blood. So too, the Shekhinah, the godly presence, has to flow throughout the entire world. And if there's an obstruction, it makes the world sick. And one of the greatest obstructions that could happen is when there is a lack of compassion, empathy, and love and respect within the world in itself. And how much more so within the family units. So, therefore, we have to ask ourselves, sure, it's easy to be compassionate to strangers. But how is my compassion towards those around me that Hashem gave me to love, to be compassionate towards? If I'm more compassionate to one or the other, why? This is a question we have to ask ourselves today. Why? Why do I find it easier to go out of myself for people who are seeming strangers to me, but not my own? Now, mind you, the Baal Shem Tov did teach, and this is a very important lesson, that we have to have Ahavat Yisrael, not only for the people that we know, but to love your fellow extends all the way to the stranger. That we have to have Ahavat Yisrael even for a stranger, and more so till the point of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice. And sometimes that stranger is not so strange. It's someone in our own community or our own family which is acting strange. Sometimes it could be to ourselves that we've become estranged for ourselves. Sometimes it's towards Hashem, which seems estranged from us, or we've become estranged from Him. But nevertheless, we have to have Ahavat Yisrael, to love our fellows ourselves, to the point of self-sacrifice, even for a stranger. But nevertheless, if I find it easier to give this love towards a stranger and not to someone immediate to me, well, there's a question, why? What's holding my love? Is it the fear of vulnerability? Is it the fear of attachment, of connection? Is it the fear of obligation? Because if I become more compassionate and the relationship is going to be strengthened, then it's going to oblige me to be more open and more giving and receive the other person. On the other hand, there's a question on the opposite spectrum. Is my compassion an impediment? In other words, does my compassionate get in the way of myself? Which means it's not healthy. That's the difference between healthy and unhealthy emotions. It is compassion, but it's not healthy. Because if I'm being compassionate towards causes or people who are very, very, very violent, for example, or unhealthy, and I'm just, but I feel bad, so you have to help them. They're asking for help. Then you're not being compassionate. Yes, it is compassionate, but it's an obstruction at this point. And there's a question. It's okay to put ourselves aside on a general level, even a specific level, to help someone else. It's called self-sacrifice. But is this my go-to begin with? Is this coming from a healthy place, or is it coming from an unhealthy place? In other words, we said before that everything begins with an intention and then expresses itself as a trajectory. If it's coming from a healthy place, means the intention is there's a me that Hashem created, and I'm here for one purpose, to serve Hashem. And therefore, every one of my emotions are here to openly reveal God, including compassion. Which means if I have to put myself aside in order to help, so be it. If this is what helping needs right now, so be it. Because this is the service to Hashem. And that's healthy. However, what's not healthy is to not like oneself, not love oneself, and use compassion as a driving mechanism to override oneself. So to put one at risk to help someone else, not because this is what needs to be done. It's tantamount to a mother who says, I live for my children. Obviously, a mom, as we just saw right now, the Rachel would give everything up. Everything up. She gave up her marriage to Yaakov as well as being buried next to Yaakov for the sake of the Jewish children, to the Jewish people. The question is, where does that stem from? A mother who says, I live for my children, as we spoke about in our parenting class, is very unhealthy. Because essentially what she says, I don't have a self, I don't feel good with myself, I don't feel good about my marriage, so I will live in order to make sure my children are happy. I'll be compassionate, I love her. But that's not healthy. That puts unhealthy weight on the children. And although she could be demonstrating compassion, but this is reckless and unhealthy, which will ultimately produce anxiety in her children. Rather, when the mother says, I know who I am, I know my purpose, I'm confident with myself, and yeah, my marriage is up and down, but I'm confident in that as well. My children need my time right now. But for me to give myself, I need to be present, which means I can't lose myself in this. I'll do everything in order to help them, but I need to take care of myself as well. What did they say before taking off? If God forbid the gas masks, the air masks are dispersed, make sure to put yours on first. Isn't that not compassionate to a child to watch him choke? God forbid, while you're getting your air? No, just the opposite. If you're choking and the child doesn't know what to do, it's not going to be beneficial, not for the child, and ultimately not for you. So first you've got to take care of yourself. So that's Gvura Shebet Tiferet. To know that when you're being compassionate, it is focused, it's disciplined. It's not all over the place. That it's being led according to a healthy intention. That we afford compassion to those who genuinely deserve it from us. And we prioritize compassion to those who genuinely deserve it. Of course, compassion doesn't go and flow to those who are deserving. That's by definition. Compassion means it's not what I think I like him, I don't like him. It's what the person needs. But those who Hashem placed in foremost recipient level towards us to receive our compassion. We have to ask ourselves if my compassion is it impulsive or God forbid careless? Can I assess the measure of compassion that's needed in this situation? In other words, not do I want to give it or I don't want to give it. Compassion is obviously outside of me, but I need to think, how do I actually help this person in this moment? If this person needs help, I might not like them, but they need help. So my question is, how? Can my compassion overwhelm people? Is it respectful? Because even in meting out compassion, you got to make sure that it's understood correctly. Not just move aside, I'm being compassionate now. Do I let others take advantage of my compassion? When I see a needy person, whether in my family, in my community, outside, in the street, is my compassion towards it to help them, is it just out of impulse, out of guilt, without discretion, or is it real? Do I genuinely feel that this is my purpose here? If I was brought to this situation right now, and I see this is where Hashem needs me to shine out my attribute of Tiferet. Or is this because I feel guilty, so I have to just give? Not even thinking about why did God bring me? What's the work? Just impulsive out of guilt. So we have to look throughout today. We have to make sure that when we express our compassion, is focused in a healthy manner, in a correct manner, in a holy and illuminescent manner. Rachel certainly gave her entire life, and Rachel is the wife of Yaakov. Yaakov is the attribute of Tiferet, of compassion. But Rachel gave it in such a way, she gave it not because I'm a nobody and I'm a nothing, so love my sister. I'm a nobody and nothing, so I won't be buried next to my husband. I'm a nobody and nothing, and that's why I cry over my children. No. It comes from her knowing herself. From being in touch and one with her holiness. Just like when Moshe stood up to Hashem, as it were, by the golden calf, and other times, Avram, is not because of a lack of self, of a lack of faith, of emunah, chas v'shalom. It's those who are 100% sincere in their faith and emunah, trust in Hashem, and knowing of who they are, that they're created by Hashem and they're magnificent, that Hashem believes in them so much, that they are able to question Hashem. That they're questioning and they're able to put themselves aside, like Moshe says to Hashem, if you don't forgive the Jewish people, wipe me away from your book. Very simple. There's a no-brainer here. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who was able to destroy the luchot, to shatter the tablets that Hashem gave him as a present. It was his, the Torah, in order to save the criminals. The ones who were actually idol worshipping. But this comes from a place of strength, not a weakness. When we meet out compassion, it has to come from a place of strength, of confidence, of knowing who we are, knowing our purpose in this world. And therefore, if we're meeting out compassion because we're a godly human being, we're a holy human being, we're not just being nice people. Because nice people, we spoke about the difference. Being nice is usually sent from the animal soul. It has a need to feel good about itself. It doesn't want to feel guilty. So let me go help someone. I feel somebody. If they were in the, if I was in the street, I would hate it if somebody walked by me. Or if I'm going to walk by this person and not help, I'm going to feel guilty all night. That's animalistic. Because what if you don't feel guilty? What if you're not in the mood because you don't have to help this person now? It's the opposite. When you know who you are, and you know that God brought you to this situation, is exactly when you need to bring out your compassion. Because you don't know this person. You don't like or not like this. You don't know. There's no chesed or gvura involved here. This is a complete stranger. But yet you understand that Hashem brought you to this situation. So you have to be compassionate. And if you're going to be compassionate because you're godly, because you're holy, then the compassion has to be godly and holy itself. It has to be not just good, it has to transmit holiness. And if that's the case, how do I transmit holiness to this stranger right now? Not in a way that satisfies me, that makes me feel good. So don't speak to him about Hashgacha Pratis because that will make you feel good. How do you know this person even want to hear about Hashgacha Pratis this moment? That's not compassion. Don't talk about God and this. That's not compassion. You know, those people who walk around like the guy, accept God, and that you're talking about for yourself. You're not talking to the person. Often the Rebbe would advise for families not to try to bring each other closer, because there's enough emotive turbulence in the family without mixing God into the situation. Sometimes you have to. It depends on your relationship. It's not your children. It's something. If it's your siblings, your in-laws, your own children, that's your responsibility. But with somebody else, what? Who told you? Your parents? Who told you have to do this? Anyway, but in the same situation, we have to make sure that our compassion is holiness. We'll conclude with a story. It also pertains to an attribute of Hod, which we'll discuss, but this story is a perfect story to conclude with today. There was a very famous It's a very famous story. I heard it from one of my colleagues, who I believe that it was told to him by one of his congregant who actually was there. When the Allies came into the camps to rescue the Jewish people, what they saw to their horror were walking skeletons. The walking dead, as they called it. Literally, there was some skin on skeletons. And those allies who walked in, they walked in with provisions, that sandwiches, that chocolate. So out of a sense of, I can't believe what's happening, they started feeding the Jews. But the Jews haven't eaten in a long time, other than a little black bread. So eating food and calorie-rich food, and not only wasn't prudent for them, some of them died. Their stomachs exploded. They couldn't handle it. So there was a command from up on that do not feed the Jews until they're seen by the doctor in the infirmary. This is a matter of life or the opposite. Well, one of the soldiers was walking in a complete haze, seeing what's happening in front of him, was tapped on his leg. There was a little child, 7, 8 years old somehow, is there. And he pointed to his mouth. He's hungry. Now, there's a conundrum. What is he going to do? Is he going to feed the child or tell him no? Either direction is problematic. He can't feed the child. He's risking killing him. But to tell him no, that's cruel. Obviously, he wanted to give him. So he closed his eyes and thought to himself, what can I give this child that he genuinely needs right now that I can give? And he thought, and very quickly it dawned on him, child doesn't have parents. They were murdered. Who's hugging the children? So the soldier knelt down, closed his eyes, thought about the children, his own children that he left back home, that he hasn't seen for over a year now, and just hugged this boy with all the warmth and intensity as though he's hugging his own son. And the boy hugged him back. And they held in this embracing position for a few minutes. When the soldier opened up his eye, he saw that there was an entire line of children behind this boy, all waiting to receive their hugs as well. Compassion has to be meted out according to the need of the recipient, not according to the need of the giver, because then it's not a compassion anymore. It's again selfishness disguised as compassion. And so today we ought to work on our Gvura Shebechesed to make sure that the compassion, Gvura Shebetiferet, that the compassion is meted out correctly from a healthy place, from a holy place, is charged up correctly, is meted out correctly, and so on and so forth. We'll continue this tomorrow. Chodesh Tov. Tonight is a night of Farbrengens, Beit Yar. Shabbat is a Shabbat of Farbrengens. A lot to be said.